Thank you very much. Representative McCall, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ranking member. Throughout my career as a federal prosecutor in the state of Texas, chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, and now chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I've never seen this border more out of control. And my home state of Texas is taking the brunt of this crisis. In fact, Chief Border Patrol Officer Ortiz testified that we no longer have operational control of the border. This didn't have to happen. And I would argue it's a self-inflicted wound. The reason for this chaos is a direct result of the Biden administration's termination on day one of two of the most effective policies implemented during the previous administration, and that is the migrant protection protocols and asylum cooperative agreements. In fact, don't take my word for it. The Border Patrol tells us this, that the rescission of these policies on day one had a direct cause and effect on the chaos that we're now seeing. And these policies worked because they required migrants to remain in Mexico pending their asylum claims instead of being released into the United States. Now we're back to the policy of catch and release. It also prohibited migrants from eligibility for U.S. asylum if they pass through any countries with these asylum agreements. But since the Biden administration took office, migrant encounters have soared to 5 million. Fentanyl's flowing across the border has killed over 100,000 Americans, many of them young people. My son just went to a funeral of one of his best friends last week, and my daughter's been to 4. My committee's contribution to the House GOP border package will reinstate and codify the migrant protection protocols known as Remain in Mexico. And it will also direct the Secretary of State to re-enter MPP and ACAs to bring back order to our immigration system and protect Americans. For without acting, we were silently enabling the human smugglers, sex traffickers, and drug cartels, all while leaving our Border Patrol's agents at continued risk. By the way, the suicide rate's never been higher than it is today. This should not be a partisan issue to give our government the tools they need to stem this generational crisis and restore U.S. operational control to the border. And I want to commend Chairman Jordan, Chairman Green for their hard work on this. This will be the strongest border security bill ever passed by the United States House of Representatives if we pass this on Thursday, which, by the way, Title 42 will be revoked on Thursday. No doubt the flood at the border will only get worse, not better. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Representative Castro, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Cole, Ranking Member McGovern, and members of the Rules Committee. And thank you for the opportunity to testify in opposition specifically to Title II of H.R. 2, Title III, I'm sorry, of H.R. 2, which was marked up in the House Foreign Affairs Committee as H.R. 1690, the Order Act. I'm glad to join you in my capacity as Ranking Member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee Subcommittee on the Western Hemisphere. Last year marked 100 years since my grandmother, Victoria Castro, came to the United States as a young orphan in the wake of the Mexican Revolution. On her paperwork, the San Antonio relatives who took her in wrote that she was coming to live. In America, she found a better life, just as many of your ancestors did, the Irish, the Germans, the English, the Spanish, immigrants with descendants in this room today. And today, we face different challenges with migration, and I don't think there's a single person in this room who believes that our current immigration system meets our country's needs. But instead of tackling these challenges head-on, Title III of this bill would institute destructive, dangerous policies that force vulnerable asylum seekers into even more desperate circumstances. When similar protocols were previously in place, human rights observers recorded thousands of violent attacks against migrants sent to Mexico, including kidnapping, rape, and other very brutal crimes. That so-called Remain in Mexico policy, as cruel as it was, included exemptions for unaccompanied minors, children, and people who don't speak Spanish. This bill includes neither of those exemptions. If H.R. 2 becomes law, asylum seekers from across the world would be required to first apply for asylum in Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, or El Salvador, countries that combined have less than 1/20th of the U.S. GDP. And let's be honest, many people in this room won't even drink the water when they go to these countries. Some advocates for the bill have described this as, quote, burden sharing. But the countries named in this bill cannot shoulder the same burden as the world's largest economy, our nation, nor should they be expected to. When we talk about immigration policy, I think folks often lose sight of the real people that our discussions affect. Last month in the House Foreign Affairs Committee, I introduced an amendment to exempt people with disabilities, persecuted religious minorities, and even Ukrainian refugees from this bill. But every single member of the Republican majority voted it down. Under H.R. 2 as drafted, for example, if a Uyghur Muslim escapes one of China's concentration camps in Xinjiang and makes it to Mexico and seeks asylum in the United States would force that person to remain in Mexico. If a group of Cuban dissidents sail to Florida and land outside of a port of entry, they would not be allowed to apply for asylum. Under this bill, Ukrainians fleeing Russia's brutal invasion of their homeland, Catholics fleeing religious persecution in Nicaragua, and Christians or other religious minorities fleeing Iran would all be required to remain in Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, or El Salvador, rather than unite with family right here in the United States. Many of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle have expressed concerns about how our immigration system will be able to handle a rising tide and a rising number of immigrants post-Title 42. And I agree that we need to build a more resilient and more efficient and effective system. But what we've seen time and time again is that cruel, restrictive policies like Title 42 and Remain in Mexico do not stop desperate people from fleeing persecution, oppression, and violence. This bill, sadly, is a way to get rid of a problem without solving it. And that's the best that we could hope to accomplish by passing this piece of legislation. Instead, it forces vulnerable people to take dangerous, irregular paths to the United States, the exact kind of journey that led to the deaths of 53 people in the back of a sweltering tractor trailer in my hometown of San Antonio last summer. H.R. 2 also ends humanitarian parole, except in very limited circumstances. Since the February 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine, the United States, for example, has admitted 150,000 Ukrainians and their family members on humanitarian parole. If we pass H.R. 2, these families fleeing Putin's invasion would lose the ability to be in the United States. Let me say that again. They would lose the ability to be in the United States. The Afghans who fought alongside the United States and were evacuated from Kabul in August 2021 are largely in the United States through humanitarian parole. If we pass H.R. 2, they would lose the ability to remain in the United States. In February of this year, the United States evacuated 222 brave Nicaraguans who were imprisoned by the Ortega Murillo regime. They are here with their families on parole, and two of these individuals testified to the House Foreign Affairs Committee in March. They too would lose their status. Mr. Chairman, there are meaningful bipartisan solutions to address the causes of forced migration to the United States. And I've been proud to work across the aisle to introduce several bills that would expand the scope of U.S. foreign assistance to encourage sustainable economic development in many of these countries that we're talking about today. Unfortunately, H.R. 2 does not include any serious attempt to address the root causes of migration, and so people will keep coming. This bill is harmful and counterproductive, and it betrays our nation's legal and moral obligations to asylum seekers who deserve better, and also betrays America's legacy. Before I yield, I want to make a brief point about the rhetoric used during this debate in this Congress and also in this country. In 2019, a madman in my home state of Texas drove 10 hours to El Paso, Texas, and murdered 23 people, including American citizens, to stop what he called the Hispanic quote, invasion, when members of Congress use their elevated platforms to dehumanize migrants and fearmonger about quote unquote illegals, aliens, and invasions, their words have consequences that echo far beyond these halls. The language that we use matters, and I urge members of this committee and of this Congress to be mindful about how your rhetoric can put a target on the backs of migrants and those who may target them. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this bill. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I just have a few questions, and I'm going to direct them to the three chairmen we're privileged to have with us today. So Chairman Jordan, Green, McCall, I understand that all your respective committees have held hearings highlighting the causes of this unprecedented illegal immigration surge on our southern border and the effects that's having on border residents and border communities throughout the country. Can you tell us a few of the real-life consequences your witnesses have described? And I'll start with you, Chairman Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think all the committees have had parents who lost a loved one, lost a son or daughter to fentanyl. So those always sink in as, you know, that's powerful testimony from a mom or a dad. But I think for me also it was when we did the field hearing in Yuma, hearing from the hospital administrator and what it's meant to the hospital there, and then hearing from the farmers. I mean, they've had E-Verify in their state. It works fine. They love what they have in Arizona, and yet they talked about the damage done because of the flood of illegal migrants coming in the country, what it's done to their fields, people just camping out in their fields. So I think there's real consequences for the people who produce our food. I learned an interesting fact when we were in Yuma. They said 90% of the leafy green vegetables we eat during the winter come from Yuma, Arizona. I had no idea. That was one of the facts we learned when we were down there. So, but the most powerful ones are always the moms and dads talking about what fentanyl did to a loved one and their family.
Thank you very much. Chairman Green, same question to you. Can you tell us a little bit about what the witnesses appeared before your committee had to tell you about the consequences of the surge we're dealing with?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, there are the human costs, and then there are the financial costs of this open border. And of course, Chairman Jordan mentioned a few of the human costs, fentanyl. You know, taking that a step further, Tennessee is faced with having to take care of children that are born to fentanyl-addicted mothers. That is a human tragedy because a child is born addicted to an opiate. That child winds up in the ICU, et cetera. There are learning disabilities that are associated with that addiction from birth. So there is the human side of it, but there's also the financial side of it. It costs the state of Tennessee $1,600,000 per child, and we had 40,000 of those last year. So if you sit and think about the human costs, and then you think of all of the various financial costs of this, it is substantial. And the CEO that Chairman Jordan mentions also came and testified about his uncompensated health care costs. The fact that the human side of that is people from his own community have to go 200 miles to deliver babies because his obstetrics ward is full of migrants. And I know it's been implied earlier that this bill somehow stops people from getting health care. It does not. We have an EMTALA law in this country that every patient who presents himself will be taken care of. We're not undoing EMTALA in this legislation, so that's misinformation. But there is a human cost and a financial cost.
Thank you very much. Chairman McCall, same question to you. Can you tell us something about what witnesses that appeared before your committee had to say about the consequences of this illegal surge?
Sure, and thanks for the question. And I've seen this movie before, but it's the worst I've seen now. The dangerous journey that they have to make to get to the border. The children who die along the route, who are also abused, sexually abused along the way by smugglers, by cartels. It's absolute suffering. The magnet that brings them in was a change in policy on political asylum, because the cartels are really smart. They know that our laws changed on day one. They can now get these people inside the United States, and then they make this dangerous journey. I've seen horrific filmage of what the cartels do without getting into graphic detail. But then once they get into the United States, Mr. Chairman, what are we going to do with 5 million people that have no legal status in this country that have to live in the shadows? Where do the young women go? They get sex trafficked. Where do the young men go? They go to MS-13 or gangs. They become their families. There are stash houses inside the United States where 20 of these adopted children or sponsored children go to that makes no sense at all because they're being trafficked in the United States. To make things worse, I've seen 18-wheelers stuffed with bodies that have died in Mr. Castro's district that have been smuggled into the United States, and they have suffocated and died because the smugglers don't give a damn about them. They just care about the money. And that's what's driving this. It's a change in policy. And I do have to respond. I do respect my dear friend from San Antonio, Mr. Castro. However, my bill will have no impact on someone's ability to apply for political asylum. That still remains their right. And in fact, he talks a lot about Ukrainians and Afghanistans, who I have done a lot to protect. The ones already in the United States are protected. And individuals already paroled in the United States are protected, and our bill clearly says that. So I do want to correct the record on that. But the human suffering, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for the question, it's horrific and it needs to stop.
Thank you very much. Once again to our three chairmen along the same lines, could each of you talk briefly and walk us through the committee markups that resulted in the bill that we're considering today, talk about the process that got you to your product, so to speak. And again, I'll start with you, Chairman Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was a long process with lots of amendments offered. Some things we had to work with our own members on some clarifying language that has been not only done in the committee, but also in conjunction with members not on the Judiciary Committee. And we've worked closely, and I want to commend the other committees as well, worked closely with Mr. Green and Mr. McCall. So it was a long process, but we pushed through it. And I think you said this in your opening statement. I appreciate it. I do think it's the strongest immigration enforcement legislation that we've ever put together. And I hope, in fact, it passes on Thursday, which I think it will.
Thank you very much. Chairman Green, same question. Talk to us a little bit about the process that got you to your portion of the bill.
Thank you, Chairman Cole. We, as soon as I got the opportunity to lead the committee, I began meeting with the members and really folks across the entire conference and assembled the ideas, put the language together, rebuilt that language a couple of different times. The actual markup itself was, as I mentioned earlier, 16 hours. It was lengthy. We had a lot of amendments brought forward. I will say that to Mr. Ivey's point earlier, some of those amendments have some hope, but they need work, and we intend to work with our colleagues across the aisle to develop some of those ideas, and we will have a bipartisan hearing to address those issues that were brought up. But they weren't in a place where we could put them on this bill, and it didn't fit this bill. So a lot of hard work, a lot of labor, a lot of cooperation, and I think the product that we got is a good one. And I agree with Mr. Jordan. Our dialogue across committees, between committees, has been fantastic, and I appreciate his leadership and insight and mentorship.
Thank you very much. And again, Mr. McCall, to you, same thing. Can you tell us a little bit about the process that you went through to get to your portion of the bill?
Sure. We've had several hearings on this issue. We had contact with many organizations on the outside, many groups, about this. We had a full day of markup. I've even, I have to say, Mr. Chairman, I've as I mentioned in my opening statement, I've gone down to the border many times. I've talked to the chief Border Patrol officers down there about what caused this phenomenon. And I'm trying to make this as objective as I can. They're not Republican or Democrat down there. They say the direct cause and effect was a rescission of the migrant protection protocols, remain in Mexico. I don't think there's any dispute about that. Even the chief Border Patrol officer, even Secretary Mayorkas knows better, and I've had conversations with him, as well as the Secretary of State, Blinken, who knows that when we have these policies in place that take the magnet away that this policy does work. I think because it was enacted under the previous administration and it had Trump's name attached to it, they didn't want to touch it. And it's a political move, and it's a bad policy.
Thank you very much. Before